In the golden age of the Pharaohs, Egypt was the shining jewel of the ancient world, a realm where god-kings ruled as living deities, where the horizon was pierced by stone pyramids that defied time, and where gold flowed through palaces as freely as the waters of the Nile. To the outside world, it was perfection, a land where order, beauty, and divine justice prevailed. But that was the illusion. Beneath the painted walls and sacred hymns lay a reality far darker than the sunlit courts would ever reveal. For women who defied the rules of this empire, there existed punishments, so severe they seemed crafted not by mortal men, but by the gods themselves. Punishments designed not merely to end life, but to dismantle the soul, to leave behind a legacy of terror so potent that even centuries could not erase its sting. These were sentences wrapped in ritual, cruelty, and fear. The pharaohs understood power like no other rulers in history. They knew that fear was a more potent weapon than any army, and that to control a society, you must also control its women, their actions, their voices, even their thought. A wife's betrayal, a daughter's rebellion, or a priestess's blasphemy could be seen as threats to the stability of the entire kingdom. And so the punishments were crafted to match the gravity of these crimes. Some were staged as public spectacles, their cruelty meant to echo through every street, ensuring no woman would dare follow the same path. Others were carried out in silence, behind temple walls, or deep in desert sands, the victim's name carved out from inscriptions, their existence erased so completely that history itself forgot them. But if they were erased, how do we know they exist? Only through faint, scattered traces. A torn hieroglyph here, a whispered myth there, clues buried beneath centuries of silence. What you're about to discover is a truth Egypt never wanted the world to see, a truth hidden under layers of propaganda, myth, and deliberate destruction. We will follow the trail of evidence across dusty tombs, fragile papyrus scrolls, and forbidden temple carvings to uncover what truly happened to these women. And as we peel back each layer, the reality will come into sharp, shocking focus. Not the Egypt of romantic tales, but an Egypt where beauty and brutality walked hand in hand. By the time we reach the end, you will know why these stories were buried, and you may never look at ancient Egypt the same way again. So watch closely, listen carefully, and don't turn away, because the most disturbing truth is the one history didn't want you to remember. To understand the punishments that haunted women in ancient Egypt, we must first step into the world in which those punishments were born, a world shaped not only by kings and temples, but by an unshakable belief in Mut. Mut was more than a goddess. She was the very fabric of existence, the embodiment of truth, harmony, and balance. Her feather was the measure against which every human heart would one day be weighed in the afterlife. Breaking Mut was not simply a legal matter. It was a cosmic violation, a crack in the divine order that held the universe together. And in Egypt, such a breach demanded swift, decisive, and often merciless correction. In this vast land, stretched along the Nile's life-giving waters, the pharaoh stood as the living embodiment of Mut. He was not merely a king, but the supreme judge, the ultimate interpreter of divine will, and the enforcer of cosmic law. Beneath him, viziers acted as the highest-ranking administrators of justice, presiding over courts that could decide the fate of both noble and commoner. Scribes, with reed pens and rolls of fresh papyrus, sat in the shadows of these proceedings, their job not to judge, but to record every detail, names, accusations, testimonies, and verdicts, creating an unbroken chain of accountability in ink and symbol. The legal process itself was both sophisticated and deeply intertwined with religion. Trials could be held in bustling urban halls, echoing with heated voices, or within the cool, incense-filled chambers of a temple where gods were invoked as silent witnesses. Witnesses were called, oaths sworn, and evidence presented. sometimes in the form of oaths, sometimes through the weight of testimony alone. Men and women, at least in theory, stood equal before these courts. A woman could own property, manage her own business affairs, and bring legal action against a man if wronged. Some even served as priestesses, administrators, or heads of estates, positions that brought wealth and influence. But the balance was deceptive. For all its sophistication, the Egyptian justice system carried hidden traps, especially for women. The law might acknowledge their rights, but it also scrutinized their behavior under an unforgiving lens. A man's transgression could be seen as a personal failing. A woman's transgression could be interpreted as a moral contagion, a threat to the purity of the household, the stability of the community, even the authority of the pharaoh himself. Certain accusations, adultery, blasphemy, treason, or interfering with sacred rituals, could transform a woman from a citizen into an enemy of the state almost overnight. And the punishments? They were calibrated not just to penalize, but to warn. The Egyptians understood that justice, when displayed publicly, could shape society more powerfully than any written law. Punishments might unfold before a gathered crowd in the marketplace, under the scorching sun, so that every gasp, every shudder, became part of the lesson. Other times they were carried out in isolation, in the silent corridors of power, where the absence of witnesses made the act all the more terrifying. Even a wealthy noblewoman could find herself standing before a judge, with no allies, knowing that her fate could swing from life to death in a single decree. Beneath all of this ran an unspoken truth. Justice in ancient Egypt was not purely about fairness. It was about preserving the image of balance. If that image meant bending the rules, silencing voices, or making an example of the vulnerable, so be it. The system's greatest strength was also its greatest weapon. Its deep connection to religion gave it an unassailable authority. To challenge a verdict was to challenge the gods themselves. And so, while the courts promised fairness in the name of Ma'at, the reality was often harsher, more personal, and far more dangerous. For women, especially those who dared to test the boundaries, punishment could be swift, public, and unforgettable. In the heart of ancient Egypt, love was not always a blessing. For a woman, desire could be a dangerous flame, one that, if seen as forbidden, could burn her life to ashes. Adultery was not simply a personal betrayal. It was an assault on the sacred balance of Ma'at, a violation so grave it tainted the offender's soul and stained the honor of her family for generations. In noble households, this transgression was not handled quietly. Punishments were crafted to leave permanent scars, not just on the flesh, but on a woman's identity. The removal of a nose or ear was more than mutilation. It was a lifelong declaration of disgrace. Every glance from a passerby, every murmur in the market, would remind her, and everyone else, that she had crossed a line no one dared cross. In Egypt, shame was not just felt, it was worn. Imagine the moment, guards storming into a sunlit courtyard, their sandals pounding the stone, their bronze weapons gleaming. A woman, adorned in fine linen, is seized in front of her servants, her cries echoing off the wall. Neighbors peek from their doorways, whispering, knowing the sentence that awaits. For some, the punishment was not swift death. Death was merciful. Instead, there was the public flogging, the humiliation of being paraded through the streets, each strike of the whip tearing flesh and dignity alike. Others were sent far away, to labor camps in Egypt's barren frontiers, where the heat devoured strength and the nights bit with cold. These women would vanish from their former lives entirely, their names erased from family records as though they had never existed. In a land obsessed with the afterlife, this erasure was a fate almost worse than death. But not all trials were public. Some took place in the hushed corridors of sacred temples, where the accused stood before priests, who claimed to speak with the gods themselves. For priestesses bound by vows of celibacy, breaking those oaths was more than a scandal. It was sacrilege. The gods were thought to demand payment for such a sin, and the payment was steep. Ancient inscriptions whisper of punishments that would chill the blood even of hardened men, being sealed alive in a tomb, the air growing thinner with each passing moment. The darkness, absolute. The walls pressing in like the judgment of the gods. These secret executions left no public spectacle, only a silence heavy enough to suffocate. The temple doors would close, the chants would fade, and the condemned would vanish, becoming just another unspoken secret buried in Egypt's sand. And yet, moral crimes were only the beginning. Beyond matters of the heart, there were offenses that struck at the very core of Egypt's stability, crimes that threatened the throne itself. And for those, the punishments grew unimaginably cruel. What could drive a queen, a servant, or a slave to risk such wrath? Stay with me, because what comes next is darker still. Before we continue, ask yourself this. If you lived in the court of the Pharaoh, surrounded by gold, servants and endless feasts, but learned a secret that could destroy the kingdom, would you stay silent, or would you risk everything? Remember, in Egypt, one whispered accusation could be the difference between a seat beside the queen and an unmarked grave in the desert. If you are still here, comment, "Mart will judge me," because what comes next isn't just about life or death. It's about a fate far worse. In ancient Egypt, religion wasn't just faith. It was law, identity, and the very glue that held the universe together. Breaking those laws wasn't merely a crime against society. It was cosmic treason. For women, especially those tied to the temple, even the smallest rumor could spiral into a devastating ordeal. The gods were believed to see into every heart, and in a culture obsessed with the afterlife, spiritual purity was everything. A priestess accused of taking a single grain from an offering table could be accused of robbing the gods themselves, a theft not of gold or bread, but of divine favor. And the punishment wasn't limited to the flesh. It reached into eternity, threatening to erase her her spiritual essence from existence. In such a world, innocence meant nothing without proof, and proof could vanish like sand in the wind. The penalties for these sacred violations were designed to leave a permanent mark on the soul. Priestesses found guilty of desecrating holy relics or embezzling temple funds could be subjected to ritual mutilation, not simply as a deterrent, but as a symbolic act to sever their bond with the gods. Their noses might be cut off to mark them as unworthy to breathe the air blessed by Ra, or their tongues removed so they could never again speak prayers to the divine. In some cases they were denied mummification entirely, their bodies buried in shallow, unmarked graves, left to rot under the scorching sun. Without proper rites, the Egyptian belief held that their bay, the part of the soul that traveled, would wander forever, lost and broken. It wasn't enough to end their mortal lives. The goal was to deny them the peace of eternity, turning death itself into an endless punishment. Even darker were accusations of sorcery, a crime feared and despised as much as treason. A woman accused of cursing the harvest, bewitching a nobleman, or causing illness through magic could be condemned without trial, the mere testimony of a respected witness sealing her fate. Execution in these cases was not straightforward. Some were buried alive in sacred sand pits, surrounded by protective amulets meant to trap their spirits. Others were drowned in the Nile during ritual purifications, their bodies offered to the crocodiles as both sacrifice and warning. The public watched in silence, knowing that to speak in defense of the accused risked sharing her fate. In the minds of the devout, such women weren't merely criminals, they were enemies of the gods, and destroying them was an act of holy preservation. And so, in the shadow of the great temples, Justice and faith fused into a blade sharper than any sword. Egypt's rulers understood that the human body could be destroyed in an instant, but a name, a legacy, could echo for centuries. That was why the most chilling punishment wasn't execution or torture, but erasure itself. This was the dreaded practice historians call damnatio memoria, the deliberate destruction of a person's memory. Stone carvers would be ordered to scrape names from tomb walls, chip away faces from statues, and rewrite official scrolls so that the condemned's existence became a ghost story without a ghost. In a culture where the afterlife was built upon the living remembering you, this was annihilation beyond death. For noble women accused of treachery, it meant generations would pass without knowing they had ever drawn breath, their voices stolen, not only from the present, but from eternity. It was, in every sense, a murder of the soul through the blade of silence. One haunting account speaks of a high-born woman accused of conspiring against her royal husband. She wasn't paraded for public punishment, nor given the chance to defend herself in a trial. Instead, her tomb inscriptions were meticulously scraped away until they were nothing more than blank stone scars. Her coffin, once carved with prayers for eternal life, was stripped of its identity and reused for another, as if her body had never occupied it. Her statues were shattered, fragments buried in temple rubble, ensuring no pilgrim or passerby could whisper her name. This was no random act of destruction. It was a calculated obliteration of identity, a rewriting of reality itself. And in the belief system of ancient Egypt, where remembrance was the bridge to immortality, this was considered the ultimate cruelty. To be condemned to physical death was one fate. To be condemned to vanish from memory was another, far worse. For all its architectural marvels and golden splendor, Egypt was a land where the tightrope between power and peril was impossibly thin. The women whose stories we've unearthed lived in a world where a single accusation, real or fabricated, could erase everything they were. Today, the punishments may look different, but the danger of silencing voices still echoes. Around the world, women are imprisoned for speaking out, harassed into silence, or erased from history books through deliberate omission. The crimes of the past remind us that justice is fragile, shaped by those who hold the pen or the chisel. Remembering these women is not just an act of curiosity, but of defiance. It is saying, you can smash the statues, burn the scrolls, and grind the names to dust, but you cannot stop the truth from being spoken again. Their silence was forced. Ours must never be. If you've made it this far, it means you've walked through the shadows of ancient Egypt's darkest chambers, witnessed punishments too brutal for the faint of heart, and stood face to face with the reality that history often hides. Now imagine, if this was your world, if your life, your voice, and your very memory could be stolen away in a single heartbeat, not for a crime you committed, but for the rumor of one. Would you dare to speak out against the Pharaohs? Would you risk it all to defend your truth, knowing the cost was not just death, but the destruction of your soul? Or would you stay silent, blending into the crowd, praying the gods and men alike never turn their eyes toward you? Subscribe for more of ancient history's hidden stories, because so much of the past remains in the dark, and together we can drag it back into the light. Tell me, which punishment chilled you the most? The fire that erased the soul, the tombs that sealed the living, or the silence that erased their names forever? Your comment keeps these forgotten voices alive. Your share ensures their stories are never buried again. And your like, well, that's your way of saying you'd survive the court of the Pharaoh, or would you?